Welcome to my channel where, among other things, we dive deep into the complexities of American politics. In today's video, we're going to tackle a subject that frustrates many Americans: the role of swing states, the intricacies of primaries, and the flaws within the electoral system. And why do we have to register to vote? Shouldn't it be automatic like in some countries? We'll cover the issues that I think need fixed as well as possible solutions, and I'll recommend some paths to bring it about. But trust me, it won't be easy. There are some rich and powerful folk who like the system just the way it is, broken. We'll talk about that more later as well. It's no secret that the electoral process in the United States leaves much to be desired. The fact that the outcome of general elections often hinges on a handful of swing states is a source of frustration for many, and rightly so. Our system cries out for reform, and one of the most pressing issues is the need to abolish the Electoral College altogether. The Electoral College stands as the constitutional mechanism by which the United States selects its president every 4 years. Established by the framers of the Constitution as a compromise between election of the president by a vote in Congress and election by popular vote, the Electoral College comprises 538 electors, with each state allocated a number of electors equal to the combined total of its Senate and House of Representatives delegations. However, the Electoral College has faced widespread criticism for various reasons, primarily due to its tendency to undermine the principle of one person, one vote. It shouldn't matter what state you live in. Your vote should have the same value as mine does in the swing state of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The following are some of the key failures associated with the Electoral College. The winner-takes-all system employed by most states means that a candidate can win the presidency by securing the majority of electoral votes, even if they do not win the popular vote nationwide. This discrepancy has led to instances where the candidate who received fewer popular votes still assumes the presidency, undermining the democratic principle of majority rule. Due to the winner-takes-all system, candidates often concentrate their campaign efforts and resources in so-called swing states, where the outcome is uncertain. As a result, the concerns and preferences of voters in non-swing states are often overlooked, leading to a skewed representation of the electorate's interests. The Electoral College tends to amplify the underrepresentation of minority groups, particularly in states where their populations are smaller or marginalized. This can perpetuate disparities in political power and diminish the voices of minority communities in the presidential election process. Addressing the shortcomings of the Electoral College requires comprehensive reforms aimed at promoting fairness, accuracy, and inclusivity in the presidential election process. No less than a groundswell of popular opinion and a grassroots movement larger than anything we've seen since the Civil Rights Movement. Some potential solutions include: one proposed solution is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, wherein participating states agree to award their electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote, regardless of the outcome in their respective states. This would effectively ensure that the candidate who receives the most votes nationwide becomes president, aligning with the principle of majority rule. Another approach is to allocate electoral votes proportionally based on each state's popular vote. Rather than employing the winner-takes-all system, states could divide their electoral votes among candidates based on the percentage of votes they receive, thereby better reflecting the preferences of the electorate. My personal opinion, I don't think we should vote for electors who then vote for the candidates. Why can't we vote directly for the candidates themselves through popular vote? We don't need to vote for electors, and we shouldn't be voting as states. Eliminating this indirect method of voting, a person's vote in California or Texas would hold as much weight as a vote from Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, or Michigan. And voting day and primary voting day should be paid holidays for everyone. Period. And, while we are talking about primaries, they should all be on the same day for the same reason the Californian and Texan don't like the power of the swing states in the general elections. Because it isn't fair. Here's why. As a resident of Pennsylvania, we don't have it as good as you think electorally speaking. Our primary isn't until April 23rd. The nominations for president are typically already decided by this time, as they are this year. This leaves us with limited options and a sense of futility when it comes to casting our primary ballots. I'm sure you've heard of many Democrats casting votes in the primaries for uncommitted instead of for President Joe Biden in support of Gaza. We can't do that in PA because we don't have a checkbox for uncommitted. Instead, we have to write the word uncommitted in the write-in section. Some may find that a confusing and cumbersome process that further highlights the inadequacies of our electoral system. To my fellow Pennsylvanians and residents of other states and territories who haven't had a primary or caucus yet, please remember that despite these challenges, there are still important reasons to participate in the primary process. While the presidential race may seem like a foregone conclusion, there are numerous other offices and candidates on the ballot who deserve our attention and support. From local representatives to statewide initiatives, the primary is an opportunity to shape the future of our communities. Do we really need this unequal election theater that lasts a year and a half every few years? Aren't our nerves frayed enough as it is? By having a nationwide primary, we'd shorten the election cycle, make primary voting fair across the nation. Implementing these reforms to address the inadequacies of our election systems would require huge, but not impossible, concerted efforts at both the state and federal levels. The following steps could help bring about the necessary changes. State legislatures can take the initiative to enact legislation supporting these initiatives. This would involve drafting and passing bills that reflect the desired reforms and garnering sufficient support among lawmakers. Public awareness and advocacy play a crucial role in advancing electoral reform. Organizations, activists, and concerned citizens can mobilize support for reform through grassroots campaigns, public education initiatives, and lobbying efforts directed at elected officials. Achieving more comprehensive reform may ultimately require amending the U.S. Constitution to abolish the Electoral College altogether and institute a new method for electing the president. This would necessitate a constitutional amendment process involving approval by 2/3 of both the House of Representatives and the Senate, followed by ratification by 3/4 of the states. So you can start to comprehend how difficult of a battle that will be, and here's why. Some people like the system just the way it is. It works to their advantage. The resistance to electoral reform, particularly from those with money and power, stems from a variety of factors, including the desire to maintain the status quo and preserve their influence over the political process. Here's why they might oppose such changes and how they manipulate the system to their advantage. The current electoral system, despite its flaws, often benefits entrenched interests who have the resources to navigate its complexities. Wealthy individuals and powerful corporations may prefer to maintain the status quo, as it allows them to exert significant influence over political outcomes through campaign contributions, lobbying efforts, and other forms of political spending. Reforming the electoral system could potentially diminish their ability to sway elections and policy decisions in their favor. The winner-takes-all system and disproportionate influence of swing states provide an environment conducive to elite capture, wherein the preferences of wealthy and powerful individuals are prioritized over those of the broader electorate. And here's how they do it. And what is elite capture? Elite capture is a concept often discussed in the context of development studies and sociology, particularly in relation to the distribution of resources and power dynamics within societies. Elite capture refers to the phenomenon where a small, privileged, or powerful group within a society monopolizes or controls resources, benefits, or decision-making processes to serve their own interests, often at the expense of the broader population. This can occur in various forms, such as political elites controlling government resources, economic elites monopolizing wealth and opportunities, or social elites dominating cultural or social institutions. In development contexts, elite capture is often seen as a barrier to achieving equitable and sustainable development outcomes. It can hinder efforts to promote social justice, reduce poverty, and empower marginalized groups by perpetuating unequal distribution of resources and reinforcing existing power structures. Efforts to address elite capture typically involve promoting transparency, accountability, and inclusive governance processes to ensure that resources and benefits are distributed fairly and serve the interests of the broader population rather than being concentrated in the hands of a few elites. Wealthy individuals and special interest groups funnel large sums of money into political campaigns, super PACs, and other political organizations. This allows them to exert disproportionate influence over the electoral process, effectively drowning out the voices of ordinary citizens and amplifying their own interests. By concentrating their efforts and resources in key battleground states, these elites can effectively sway election outcomes and shape the policy agenda to align with their interests. This influence can shape party platforms, candidate selection processes, and policy priorities, further entrenching the power dynamics that favor the interests of the wealthy and well-connected. Some bills are completely written by lobbyists and their rich clients and industries. It's no secret that the Republican Party and some Democrats, like soon-to-be independent Joe Manchin, are in bed with the fossil fuel industry. Joe Manchin owns a coal company. For them, it wasn't a devil's bargain. Both camps already supported lower taxes for the rich, more deregulation, and more power for already too powerful corporations. Just look at the bank bailouts as an example. There are some recent examples of how the rich and powerful have actually used their money and influence to manipulate politics and push legislation to their benefit and to the expense of everyone else. First, and probably the best example, Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission, 2010. In this landmark Supreme Court case, the court ruled in favor of Citizens United, a conservative nonprofit organization, overturning restrictions on independent political spending by corporations and unions. The decision was issued on January 21, 2010. Citizens United argued that restrictions on independent expenditures violated their First Amendment rights to free speech. The court's conservative majority agreed, holding that corporations and unions could spend unlimited amounts of money to support or oppose political candidates, as long as the spending was done independently of the candidate's campaign. This decision opened the floodgates for unlimited spending by wealthy individuals, corporations, and special interest groups in elections. It allowed the rich and powerful to pour vast sums of money into super PACs and other political organizations, enabling them to influence election outcomes and shape the political agenda to align with their interests. Wonder why Trump gave them a tax break when he was president? This could be the reason. Democracy, if that's what you want to call it here in America, is the second most important issue on this planet. The first most important issue is the health of the planet itself. Here's another way the rich game the system to their advantage. Billionaire brothers Charles and the late David Koch, owners of Koch Industries, have long been known for their extensive political spending to advance conservative causes and candidates. Their political activities have spanned several decades, with significant increases in spending following the Citizens United decision. The Koch brothers used their vast wealth to fund a network of conservative advocacy groups, think tanks, and political campaigns. They also made substantial contributions to political candidates and parties, often through channels that allowed them to evade disclosure requirements. By leveraging their financial resources, the Koch brothers have and will, unless we stop them through legislation or the courts, be able to shape public opinion, influence policy decisions, and support candidates who champion their interests, such as lower taxes, deregulation, and limited government intervention in the economy. Their most dangerous goal was to quell any progress towards climate change mitigation, because they don't see that in their best interest, even though it is in the interest of everyone whether they know it or not, or claim not to. Because, of course, the Koch brothers are in the fossil fuel industry. They're slowly gassing us to death with their carbon emissions and carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide being a heat-trapping greenhouse gas, literally warming the planet, causing ice and permafrost and glaciers to melt, warming the oceans, all of that causing a feedback loop where temperatures get warmer, causing more ice to melt, and it goes on and on. This creates higher ocean levels, changes to climates, making some hot places hotter and wet places wetter and dry places drier, all of this causing a multitude of species extinction, threats to wildlife and forests and keystone species, that is species like bees and beavers who help build and maintain the ecosystems other plants, animals, and people depend on for life itself. If we could close just 100 companies worldwide and financially support and train those workers impacted for good-paying jobs, we might be able to stop future climate changes from man-made emissions. There are 100 companies who are responsible for over 70% of all global emissions. Just 100 companies. 100 companies killing the Earth. These are just a couple of examples. If you want to be a sleuth, look where the money is. In 2023, federal lobbying was at $4.2 billion, up from $4.1 billion the year before. And that's a trend we've seen for a while now. And that's just at the federal level. Combine that with state lobbying, $46 billion a year. Statistics from Open Secrets, link in the description. And the industry spending that money? Drug manufacturers are at the top of the list. That's why our prescription drugs are so much more expensive than anywhere else in the world. The next on the list, electronics manufacturing and equipment, then insurance. See their article for more information. Every American should be familiar with this list, and it certainly fills in the gaps of what is covered or not covered in the news. Think of it this way: there may be large, moneyed special interest groups that are fighting against everything that's important to you. Your health, your financial security, your electoral power, your retirement, your life expectancy, as well as your beliefs. That's especially true of minority groups, the disabled, and gay and transgendered people. That's why I'm a Democrat. We represent everybody. The things we all hold dear. A safe, comfortable life for ourselves, our families, our friends and communities, and a good place to raise kids if we want one, with safe streets, clean air, safe food and clean water, and the ability to retire with respect, dignity, and accommodation. And no American should go into debt over medical bills or student loans or mortgages, or have to live on the streets or starve in the richest country in the world. Our DNA is 99.9% the same. We're all one race, one species of many living in a world endangered by climate change. That's why I'm a Democrat. We get that. We all have to start taking care of ourselves, our family and communities, and the world more. We're all in this together. We're fighting to keep rights, not take them, save the planet, not raise it, make life better and more equal for all, not divide and make things worse for all but the richest in this country, who frankly have too much. No one should have more than they could spend in several lifetimes. We need a groundswell here, folks. And back to what we all deserve: equal rights. And with that, an end to voter suppression in this country. What does that say about us to the rest of the world? We should be ashamed of ourselves for putting up with things like this, like police shooting unarmed blacks, many times kids. Is that the country we want to live in? We need a more resilient and climate change mitigated world, and a whole lot less points of failure, like the tragic bridge collapse in Baltimore. One bridge or avian flu or a war started by Russia can have such an impact on the world economy. We need a lot more fail-safes, and we should expect that from our government. And in case you haven't thought about it, if companies had to pay for externalities like climate change, they could eat up to 44% of their profits, according to a study of economists and reported by AP's Seth Bornstein on August 24, 2023. Trust me, the corporations are aware and aren't happy if the winds turn. They've been dreading that for years, and you have to remember, the first president of the United States to get a report on climate change was Lyndon B. Johnson on November 5, 1965. According to Rex Curry in his Greenpeace article titled Exxon's Climate Denial History, a timeline, Humble Oil knew in 1957 about man-made climate change and global warming. According to Benjamin Franta in his January 1, 2018 Guardian article, link in description, the oil industry at large knew as early as 1959. For a while there, the industry was pretty blunt about impacts of climate change and global warming. As you can see in this February 2, 1962, Humble Oil ad in Life magazine. Pictured: a melting iceberg, and the caption, "Each day Humble supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glacier." Credit: Life magazine and Google Books. Link in description. To see this and more ads, read The Guardian's article titled The Forgotten Oil Ads That Told Us Climate Change Was Nothing, link in description. Hopefully, that article can shed some authenticity and provenance to this now controversial ad. Some even claim that the ad is a fake. That's why it's always important to know the sources of where you get your information, and to be able to corroborate on your own if you need to. And to know the possible bias of the source. Not enough people do that. And not enough of us get information from disparate sources. If you're interested in that topic, watch my video, Are Americans Truly Sheltered? Examining education and news, or understanding the news, or my favorite, fake news. Why do some people believe everything they read or hear? On a related note, I also have a video on conspiracy theories, a deep dive. I also bring all these topics together in my video, Americans Don't Like to Talk About Money. Our lack of personal and political discourse is why we don't know how much a colleague makes, or how much our government gets in every year and what they do with it, and how the rich and powerful manipulate and perpetuate the fear of talking about money. It's a really good video, trust me. But yes, that ad is real. You may know Humble Oil better as Exxon. They changed their name and their honesty in 1972. As late as the 1980s, Exxon was lying to the public about the impacts as reported by Harvard Gazette correspondent Alice McCarthy in her January 12, 2023 article. Link in description. BP and Shell have similar stories, hence the term greenwashing. Exxon has continued greenwashing to at least 2000. All of the industry is involved in anti-climate change mitigation and legislation. Externalities are the indirect costs or benefits that are not reflected in the prices of goods or services, and are not borne by the parties directly involved in a transaction. In the context of business operations, externalities often refer to negative impacts on society or the environment that result from the production or consumption of goods and services, but for which companies do not bear the full costs. These unpaid costs can include environmental degradation, public health risks, and social inequality. Many companies, particularly those in industries reliant on fossil fuels or intensive resource extraction, contribute to climate change through their greenhouse gas emissions and other environmentally harmful practices. However, the costs associated with climate change, such as extreme weather events, sea level rise, and disruptions to global supply chains, are often not borne by these companies but instead passed on to society at large. Many of these get subsidies from the government, not additional taxes for screwing with the environment for decades. Those policies need to end. The impacts of climate change have been accumulating over decades, but the urgency of addressing the issue has become increasingly apparent in recent years. Companies may externalize the costs of climate change by failing to account for the environmental and social impacts of their operations and their business models. For example, fossil fuel companies may downplay or lie about the risks of climate change and resist efforts to transition to renewable energy sources in order to maintain profitability in the short term. Similarly, companies involved in deforestation or land degradation may exploit natural resources without considering the long-term consequences for biodiversity and ecosystem services. Why they should pay? Climate change poses significant risks to society and the global economy, including threats to public health, food security, and economic stability, as well as loss of nature and species. By externalizing the costs of their greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts, companies evade accountability for their role in contributing to these risks. Paying the true costs of doing business, including the costs of mitigating and adapting to climate change, is essential for promoting sustainability, resilience, and social justice. Implementing policies such as carbon pricing, environmental regulations, and corporate accountability measures can help ensure that companies internalize the externalities associated with their operations and bear the full costs of their environmental and social impacts, including mass migration like the world has never seen. People will be trying to move to more hospitable climates. And every country who could be the beneficiary of these migrants need to treat them with the understanding, respect, and dignity they deserve. Wouldn't you want the same if you have to move because of climate change? Maybe you will. People really need to stop moving to areas that are becoming more inhospitable to climate change. They aren't doing themselves any favors in the long run. Nor are we as a society for not trying to curb this behavior. There should be resiliency grants to help folks move to more climate-friendly and less vulnerable places. And cities should be eligible for categorical grants if they meet up to certain environmental and sustainable guidelines. That's one of the reasons most companies want systems privatized and deregulated. They can then do a worse job for the economy, society, and the environment, a higher profit while paying their workers less and offering less protections and safeguards. Companies care about the next quarter, not 100 years from now. Changes like that are necessary also. The problems we face are multifaceted, but they all stem from the same source: indifference, apathy, greed, or avarice. Supporting oil companies' subsidies while some go hungry or thirsty or homeless is a sin. It's not a religious teaching I'm familiar with. Certainly not that of Christianity. And that's why Christianity is antithetical to Christian nationalism. For a list of the dangers of Christian nationalism, read the article by Christianity Today, link in description. Too many of us are one or more of those things. We also have to be aware of and address the other tactics they use to keep themselves in power. Let's start off with voting restrictions and a 2021 example. Voter registration restrictions refer to laws, regulations, or policies that impose barriers or requirements on individuals seeking to register to vote. These restrictions can take various forms, including strict identification requirements, limitations on third-party voter registration efforts, purges of voter rolls, and reductions in early voting opportunities. While proponents of such restrictions often argue that they are necessary to prevent voter fraud and maintain the integrity of elections, critics contend that they disproportionately disenfranchise marginalized and minority communities, resulting in voter suppression. What happened? In March 2021, the Georgia state legislature passed Senate Bill 202, a sweeping overhaul of the state's election laws. Among its provisions were new restrictions on voter registration and absentee voting. The bill was signed into law by Governor Brian Kemp on March 25, 2021, and took effect immediately. Senate Bill 202 imposed several restrictions on voter registration efforts, including new requirements for third-party voter registration organizations. Under the law, these organizations are required to follow strict procedures for collecting and submitting voter registration forms, with penalties for noncompliance. The law also criminalizes certain actions related to voter assistance and prohibits the distribution of food and water to voters waiting in line, among other provisions. And how does that benefit the rich and powerful? These voter registration restrictions disproportionately impact marginalized and minority communities, who are less likely to have access to resources and information needed to navigate the new requirements. By making it more difficult to register voters, particularly in communities that tend to vote against their interests, the law effectively suppresses turnout among these demographics. This benefits the rich and powerful by preserving the status quo and limiting challenges to their political dominance. Additionally, the law's provisions on absentee voting and ballot drop boxes could make it harder for certain voters, especially those in urban areas, to participate in elections, further consolidating the influence of wealthy and well-connected interests. As to some other methods the rich and powerful try to steal elections is through criminalization of the ballot box. I'm going to combine a few ideas together next because they're all related. The criminalization of the ballot box refers to actions or policies that disproportionately target certain groups of voters with the intent to discourage or prevent them from participating in the electoral process. This can include voter suppression tactics, voter intimidation, and efforts to disenfranchise individuals with criminal convictions. And some of these tactics have been used by the guys on the wrong side of history for centuries. Throughout U.S. history, various tactics have been employed to criminalize the act of voting, particularly among marginalized and minority communities. From poll taxes and literacy tests during the Jim Crow era to modern-day voter ID laws and purges of voter rolls, these measures have often been used to suppress the political power of disadvantaged groups. While overtly discriminatory practices such as poll taxes and literacy tests have largely been abolished, subtler forms of voter suppression persist to this day. Voter suppression tactics can take various forms, including restrictive voter ID laws, reductions in early voting opportunities, closures of polling places in minority neighborhoods, restrictions on mail-in voting, and voter roll purges targeting individuals with common minority surnames. In that Georgia bill we mentioned earlier, Senate Bill 202, it's illegal for outside parties to even bring food or water to someone waiting in line to vote. Additionally, efforts to disenfranchise individuals with criminal convictions, such as felony disenfranchisement laws, disproportionately impact communities of color and perpetuate systemic inequalities in the electoral process. By disenfranchising marginalized and minority communities, voter suppression tactics effectively consolidate political power among the wealthy and privileged. This allows the rich and powerful to maintain control over the political agenda and perpetuate policies that serve their interests, such as tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulation of industries, and cuts to social services. By undermining the democratic principles of equality and representation, the criminalization of the ballot box reinforces existing power structures and perpetuates disparities in political participation and influence. Probably the best illustration of voter disenfranchisement and suppression is also one of the oldest. Gerrymandering, the practice of manipulating electoral district boundaries to benefit a particular political party or group, has a long, notorious, and storied history in the United States. The term gerrymander itself is a portmanteau of the surname of Elbridge Gerry, the governor of Massachusetts, and salamander, which was used to describe the shape of one of the contorted districts created under his administration. In 1812, Governor Elbridge Gerry, along with his political allies in the Massachusetts legislature, redrew the state's electoral districts to favor their Democratic-Republican Party. One of the most infamous districts created during this redistricting effort was said to resemble a salamander, as you can see in this cartoon published in the Boston Gazette published at the time. With its winding shape designed to maximize the number of Democratic-Republican voters while diluting the opposition's support, the cartoon depicted this peculiar district as a mythical creature, coining the term gerrymander. The term quickly caught on, and since then, gerrymandering has been used to describe the manipulation of electoral districts for partisan gain. However, the practice preceded the naming by 24 years. The first recorded instance of gerrymandering occurred in 1788, when Patrick Henry, the former governor of Virginia and a prominent anti-federalist, sought to influence the outcome of congressional elections in Virginia. Henry and his allies in the Virginia legislature redrew the state's congressional districts to consolidate their political power and limit the influence of Federalist opponents. By strategically manipulating district boundaries, Henry and his supporters were able to secure a majority of seats in Virginia's congressional delegation, despite the fact that Federalists actually won the popular vote statewide. This early example of gerrymandering demonstrated the potential for political incumbents to manipulate electoral outcomes through redistricting, setting a precedent for future abuses of the practice. Since then, gerrymandering has been used by both major political parties to gain electoral advantages at the expense of fair representation and democratic principles. The practice remains a contentious issue in American politics, with ongoing debates over its legality, ethics, and potential remedies. Gerrymandering has been employed by both Democrats and Republicans throughout U.S. history, but it has become increasingly sophisticated and pervasive in recent decades. State legislatures controlled by one party redraw district boundaries in a way that concentrates the opposing party's voters into a few districts, packing, while spreading their own voters across multiple districts, cracking. This ensures that the party in power maintains a majority of seats in the legislature, even if they receive fewer votes statewide. Gerrymandering allows the party in power to entrench its political dominance, protect incumbents, and suppress competition. This benefits wealthy donors and special interest groups aligned with the dominant party, as it gives them greater access and influence over the legislative process as well as guarantees to future success. This is the real swamp. Overall, the resistance to electoral reform by those with money and power underscores the broader challenges of combating entrenched interests and promoting democratic principles of fairness, transparency, and equal representation. Efforts to reform the electoral system must contend with these obstacles and address the underlying dynamics of power and influence that perpetuate inequality and undermine democratic governance. While the Electoral College has served as the cornerstone of the American presidential election process for over 2 centuries, its inherent flaws and failures underscore the need for reform. By exploring and implementing alternative methods of electing the president, the United States can strive to uphold the principles of democracy, fairness, and equal representation for all citizens. I've discussed the issues we face, the methods that the rich and powerful limit equality and voter rights, as well as the steps and hurdles we face in bringing about lasting, positive change. To really understand the scope of change and what's necessary to address these issues, I'll be creating a video on steps to create organizations and movements, coming soon. I also didn't discuss how media ownership and consolidation by these same individuals give voice to lies and manipulate public opinion. Again, I refer you to my video Fake News: Why Do Some People Believe Everything They Read or Hear? For more information on that score. The simple truth is we're being fed propaganda by the rich and powerful both here and in other countries and by other countries. Looking ahead to the general election, it's crucial to consider the broader political landscape and the candidates vying for office. Before making your decision, I urge you to educate yourself on the issues and perspectives shaping our nation. To assist you in this endeavor, I invite you to watch 2 of my previous videos: The Rise and Fall of the Republican Party and Our Conservatives, and Some Republicans, Fascists. I also highly recommend a video titled Americans Don't Like to Talk About Money. In it, it talks about the problems not talking about money is a detriment to our health, happiness, and our pocketbooks. You may also enjoy isn't the right word. You may appreciate the video, 2024, the year ahead, and one prediction. In it, I explain what the biggest issues facing us so far in 2024 are and how they're all tied to greed, avarice, inequality, disrespect, discrimination, and hatred. And often forgotten in that mix, ignorance and apathy. In other words, what we mean to each other as a species and what we owe to each other. In these videos, I delve into the historical context and ideological underpinnings that have shaped modern American politics. Whether you're a seasoned political junkie or just beginning to explore these topics, I believe you'll find valuable insights and perspectives to inform your decision-making process. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video and engage with these important issues. My channel, known as the Renaissance Spirit, is dedicated to the pursuits of a just, equitable, and humanitarian world. Video topics encompass areas including the history, politics, religion, personal development, society, culture, social and environmental justice, and other topics of liberal arts and sciences, including ancient Rome and the Roman Empire, which is a great comparison and contrast of the modern world. Topics perfect for the true modern polymath. The Renaissance ushered in a golden age in the pursuit of knowledge both lost to time and yet to be discovered. It gave birth to the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason. Embracing truth, knowledge, and an understanding and compassion for humanity opens up the world to each of us individually and improves all of humanity, affording us the opportunity to be better stewards of the earth and to each other. The Renaissance spirit, more than just a philosophy or style, but a style for living, learning, growing, and thinking. Please subscribe, turn on notifications, and share. If you're looking to explore and experience what life has to offer, I'm sure you'll enjoy the other videos on my channel. Please peruse, and let me know in the comments what you get out of them and what other videos you'd like to see. But first, please take the quiz next to see if you're a Renaissance spirit. Live the Renaissance spirit. Together, we can work towards a more informed and inclusive political discourse,